to make sure the microphones and things are working. If anyone is out there, and makes no sense to ask you this, if you can't hear us, tell me. But I know y'all will naturally, so silly comment to bring up. All right, what time is it? It is 11:30. Welcome to the Houston Museum of Natural Science. We are doing a live Ask Me Anything. We are going to start in the Paleo Lab. Here we have Colin Diggins, that you all know, and we have the world famous James Washington III, as you all know. Should I call you Sir James Washington?
No, just Lord James Washington.
Okay, Lord James Washington and Colin Diggins. We're gonna start out in the Paleo Lab. This is an AMA, obviously, so if anyone has any questions while we are in the Paleo Lab, please feel free to ask them. I don't see the chat on the screen. Hopefully it'll be up there somewhere and I can see it as soon as somebody starts asking questions. But we will cross that bridge when we come to it. So if anyone has any questions, let her rip. But let's start with what happens to fossils. I'll get on camera just for a second here so people can kind of see who's talking here. Hey, Johnny, YouTube manager here at Houston Museum of Natural Science. Before the questions start rolling in, I thought we'd start in the Paleo Lab, and specifically to kind of start the conversation by, when you go out to the fields to dig for fossils and you find these sheets and you excavate the fossils however you excavate them, they wind up in places like this, the Paleo Lab at the Houston Museum of Natural Science and other institutions and the universities and schools all around the world. What happens to the fossils after they come out of the ground and they come here? Can y'all explain that process a little bit? And feel free to hand the mic back and forth if you want to.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this might be a good one for me since I'm the lab manager. So basically in the Paleo Lab here, mostly what we do is what we call preparation. So of course, before they can go on display, before they can be researched, we have to prepare the fossils for that. We have to clean them up more or less. So usually starts with some removal of any remaining matrix or rock, and we've got a whole bunch of different tools in here. Kind of a neat example here is a field jacket. So this is essentially how they're coming in from the field. This is a plaster jacket with a bunch of burlap and a layer of tin foil separating all that so it doesn't stick to the rock underneath. And inside this big block of rock are two turtles that were found right alongside one of our T-Rexes out in the hall, the one that's our original specimen by the name of Y-Rex. And so essentially what they did is they saw the two turtles on the surface where they're eroding or being dug out of the rock, and to remove them they decided to they dug around where the turtles were at, kind of well below where they were sitting, and then wrap that entire block of rock in this jacket here. And then you dig underneath, and this has been flipped upside down, and we're slowly excavating from the bottom all the way back to the top. We're interested not just in the turtles, but of course also in all this plant material we're finding in here and anything else that might be associated. There were bones from that T-Rex found on either side, so we can't rule out the possibility that we might find another fragment from the T-Rex in here. But to remove all this hard, we've got some iron siderite here. This is a really hard mineral at the front. We use some tools called air scribes, which are like little handheld jackhammers.
We'll look at those in a minute.
Yeah. Sadly, I did not pull any out, but I can grab one real quick.
Overpromise.
Once we got the rock removed, sometimes there has to be a certain amount of repair done, right? Even if we do everything correctly, things can break every so often. Stuff, has spent millions of years in the ground. It's often very fragile, so it's very easy to slip up and make a mistake. So we have a whole fridge of glues over there, different adhesives or consolidants, to use the proper terms, to repair fossils if necessary. And then sometimes we even might need to do a little bit of restoration as well, to try and improve the appearance of the fossil if it's intended for display. So that's sort of the basics of fossil preparation. Occasionally, sometimes in here, we also work on creating replications as well. So if you visit our hall out there, we have sort of a recently installed massive block of fossils called the Marchant block. But right next to that in the case is a T-Rex tooth, and I have here in my pocket, this is a resin cast of that T-Rex tooth. So,
is that a T-Rex tooth in your pocket? Yes, it is.
Indeed.
Well, a resin cast of it.
So this is a pretty good print. It's got a lot of the details. It's maybe tough to see because it's in a clear resin, but I can certainly feel the serrations of the tooth just there.
Focus.
I'm sorry, my hand's shaking a little
No,
bit.
you're totally cool.
Too much caffeine this morning, I suppose.
Like I mentioned before we started the live stream here, I wish the phone would... The stabilization is disabled for some reason every time you start a YouTube live stream. We do have a question.
Awesome.
a couple of them coming in. Yeah, Colin just carries T-Rex teeth in his pocket. That's how he rolls. James, what do you carry in your pockets? What kind? Usually you have like fossils and shark teeth and all sorts.
Oh, that one, yeah. I have a lot of pockets now. Oh, wait, that's the thing.
Do we,
Microphone.
oh, what's the-
Technicals.
Okay, yes, we'll do that.
Yep.
So, I have several things. I have tools. I have, let's see, a pocket knife. So don't mess with geologists.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
The hand lens. I mean, we'd be here all day if I did a whole.
No. Yeah. So let's
Yeah,
get to the question that came in. How long? Let's say you found a decently intact or perfectly intact turtle here in the sleeve. How long would that take to go from the sleeve to display? How long would it take to prepare?
Yeah, fossil preparation is a very time-consuming process. It does take quite a while. It does vary a lot depending, like even in this block here, we've got different sorts of mineralization, right? This siderite is really hard, it's really slow going. This is mudstone back here. It flakes really easy. I can use hand tools. I can almost pry it up with my fingers if I wanted to. So it does kind of depend on what sort of matrix is in there. Unfortunately, in this block, it tends to be the siderite is right around the fossils. So we've already spent several months working on this off and on more or less, and I would estimate probably 40 to 80 hours have been invested in this so far, and you can see we've still got a long way to go because we don't expect to find those turtles until we get down towards the bottom. But it can vary a lot, especially depending on the types of tools we're using. We're using some of our more aggressive air scribes on this to try and make it a little bit less of a incredibly slow pace. But I always love to mention, like, we work on fossil fish in here. We say on average those take 60 to 100 hours to complete, and they're not very big fish at all. We've got 3 T-Rexes out there. Y-Rex is the one that was found with these turtles, but we've got a cast of Stan, and it was, I think, about 30,000 hours to get Stan prepped for display. He's about 70% complete, so that's a lot of time and effort.
No, you're good. Let me touch a little button on here to re-enable the noise.
I think I did
noise
accidentally hit
canceling.
something when I was trying to take it off.
There we go. No, we're good. We're good. I didn't want the air conditioning. Sorry for the wobbly camera here. I'm sorry. The stabilization is disabled on YouTube for whatever reason. Oh gosh, I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, not ask. I was going to mention to the audience, the voice you're hearing right now is Johnny Hemberger, YouTube manager and podcast manager. Me and Colin and I, to speak proper English, Colin and I did a podcast recently about fossil prep. And one of the things you were mentioning in there was, we brought up the subject of feathers and and skin and other fine specimens associated with fossils that are extremely intricate and time-consuming to extract the details from. So
Yeah.
go check out that podcast. It's a video version. It's I think it's a fossil gar fish.
Yeah, that we were standing in front of and talking about at the time, yeah.
Yep, and you can look, I did lots of 4K close-ups. You can see the fins and the scales, and then even feathers on our frigate bird. And just the level of expertise and detail, and I will say craftsmanship, that goes into bringing out that level of detail in fossils. Can you speak to that?
Oh, sure, yeah. It's part of the reason why when we're working in here, I don't have it positioned over the block right now because I didn't want it to get in our way of showing you. But we do all of our preparation under microscope. We want as close a view as possible so we know exactly what it is we're removing. We want as much detail preserved as possible. And part of the reason we kind of insist on trying to use the microscope in here is that we are looking to see if there's any skin associated with the turtles, because we do have some skin that was found alongside the T-Rex. And some folks have proposed that because it doesn't look like what people were expecting T-Rex skin to look like, the scales are incredibly tiny for such a massive animal, they think that that actually belongs to the turtles. Now, there weren't really any turtles that close to the areas where the skin was found, so we're fairly certain it's from the T-Rex. But as we're going through here, we're going to be trying to do as careful a job as possible in case there's any skin associated with these turtles, so we can try and compare it to that which is found alongside of Y-Rex. But even to begin with, when they were finding that skin, when they were preparing the T-Rex, Y-Rex, they didn't expect to find it. That was an accidental discovery, as so much in science is. So it's one of those things that if they had been less careful, if they weren't looking closely enough, they could have absolutely prepped all that material away and never known it was there, which is again why we're trying to be so very careful with the preparation of this jacket here.
And I'll remind everybody, let your questions rip.
Yeah.
This is an AMA, so ask anything. James, what do you have to add to this?
Colin, I can imagine as lab manager, you get here at 8:30 in the morning and you're sitting there the entire time, no lunch whatsoever, and you leave at 5:30. Is that what your life is?
Sadly, no. I wish I got to do 8 hours of prep a day, although that would be a little tough on the eyes and the hands. A lot of my job involves answering emails and data entry and things like that, because of course, the work we're doing to prepare the fossil is incredibly important, but it means less if we don't document what we're doing, right? So we have to have these logs here, several pages already for this block as to who's been preparing it, how long, what sort of tools they were using, whether they applied any adhesives or consolidants to the block, so that all of this is documented. So if any researchers come in to potentially work with these specimens, they can know right away without even necessarily having to look at the specimens, how it's been treated, how it's been handled, and what's been done to it. We've had a number of different volunteers working on this. I have put in a few hours myself, but not as many as I feel like I should.
Do you all want to go out to walk and talk out to the Paleo Hall?
Sure, but I also
Look at
want to just add the fact that I've dug with
Sure.
Colin, and I call him Hawkeye because he can find everything. And it's really, I mean, we love him, but we hate it because like we're looking at an area and like, oh, here's this and that. And he's like, there's an amazing thing right here. And I'm like, well, I didn't see it because of the wind. I don't know. So good job, Hawkeye.
Oh, thanks.
Among other nicknames.
That is true. Let's walk and talk. Let's go out to
Yeah.
the hall and see some of the big boys and girls. When we were on a fossil dig, I went with James. I was lucky enough to go to the Wall Quarry in Wyoming, and some people found fossils. Some people, like, you know, they stuck the knife in and boom, they hit a fossil. What's this? Oh, it might be a barosaur femur or part of its rib cage or something like that. And then we had other people. I remember one guy on the trip who just for the life of him couldn't hit a fossil, couldn't land on. We put him on one to start digging, like a big old barosaur femur.
Yep.
But that's kind of luck of draw when you go, not every time. It's like you can go fishing. When you go fishing, you don't catch a fish every single time.
Even if you're in the right
fish are
area,
there.
using the right bait and the right sort of time of day, it's not a guarantee.
And knowing where to look and kind of where you might have the best luck. But anyways, all right, so we are out here in the main hall of paleontology, the Mauryan Hall of Paleontology. So if y'all have any questions you want to know about fossils or replicas or specific things about dinosaurs, just let her rip in the comments. That's what we are here to answer. I see one of you said, I want to visit the museum. Well, come on. It's free on Tuesdays. If you got
Yeah.
no money, you can take the bus up here. You can take the light rail, whatever you want. And between 5 and 8 p.m. usually on Tuesdays is when it's free. So sometimes you don't even have to pay. I'm trying to turn on this light, and it is not cooperating. Oh, there we go.
I'm
Perfect.
blind.
Okay, so let's go. Let's start at the Stegosaurus while we wait for more questions to roll in. Colin, can you tell us something fascinating about Stegosaurus and T-Rex?
Ooh. Well, so there's actually more time between T-Rex and Stegosaurus than there is between us and T-Rex, which is always kind of fascinating. Although my personal favorite factoid doesn't involve T-Rex. I always have to mention when it comes to the Stegosaurus there that my favorite thing about him is those spikes on the end of the tail are named thagomizers.
Yeah.
They're actually named by the Far Side cartoonist. Suppose there's a cartoon where a caveman is giving a presentation saying that these were named after the late Thag Simpson or something along those lines.
Thag Simmons, yeah. It's
Yeah.
I'm well versed.
It's one of those classic paleontology jokes where we didn't actually have a name for him originally, and when they paleontologists saw that cartoon, they decided, why not? We can call them thagomizers. That sounds great.
Yeah, and so again, I'm plugging the podcast. I did a podcast specifically about the Thagomizer and why it's called the Thagomizer and where
Awesome.
it came from. And it's a Far Side panel. For those of you born, making me feel old, Far Side was a single panel comic that ran for a few decades by Gary Larson, iconic. And the panel in question where the term Thagomizer came from, it was a caveman professor in front of a projector, which is really funny, with his
Yeah.
pointing stick saying, and this is called the Thagomizer, named after the late Thag Simmons. So you can imagine what happened to the late Thag Simmons. One of the fascinating things here, and by the way, AMA Ask Us Anything is, so right across, and James can speak to this, right across from Stegosaurus, what do we have? And what is interesting about the relationship between the Allosaurus, and a Stegosaurus?
Well, I want to talk about one thing quick. You just
Sure.
mentioned to people who were born after the U2000 projector, and they're like, "What do you mean?" And then we have them today too. But
Everything I
And then
mentioned
Far
is,
Side
like,
coming from the
beyond.
1900s, so they're like, "What is these terms we're using?" Anyway, so for us, we're like, "Yes, of course." The transparency. It's an Allosaurus here. And what's really cool about our Allosaurus is we know that they are hunters of Stegosaurus because Not this one, because ours is in pretty good condition, but we have found stegosauruses with holes in their pubis bone that only match the Thagomizer of a stegosaurus. We've also found them with holes in their tail, hips too. So the idea is that we know that they're interacting, and particularly for the spot between the legs like that, the way the tail sits, it had to like aim that way to get to it.
Right.
That was a concerned effort to hit a sensitive area. And so
Yeah.
I'm just pointing it out as just a person who
No,
would be
I'm
unhappy
just
with
getting
that.
a visual of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
So it explains that what a popular theory about Stegosaurus's tail.
So the idea is that the plates and the spines are actually not in the skeleton; they're on the skin, so that their orientation could change possibly. But the idea is that for it to hit the Allosaurus, it would have to swing it around a certain way to hit that way. And they're always hitting them right in this area here for the most part. We've seen those holes here, here, and here, mainly from Wyoming, actually. So anyway, really cool.
Nice and soft. Because I mean, would you say that's a common tactic of predators, is to hit the soft parts or flip it over to get to the soft bits?
Well, what the Stegosaurus, this is it defending itself from the Allosaur.
Right.
And so the idea is that it's not, I mean, given the length of both animals, it's like doing this kind of dance, and the tail's out, and the predator's going for the head usually. So we have this like center of mass on its legs, and it's kind of moving here with the huge deltoid muscle attachments. So it's like swinging that direction. So if it's heading for the head, it's going to hit it in its hip basically. Again, this is all based on where the injury was. There's like a footprint set,
I've heard it's kind of likened in the case of Stegosaurus's tail and how it can articulate his tail and move it around. It's kind of like fencing.
Yes, I believe there was a nerdy tour guide who said that once. That's in my.
So why is it called that? So one of the common Allosaurus, by the way, lived alongside of Stegosaurus, and which was tens of millions of years before T-Rex ever showed up on the screen, on the scene.
Landscape, yeah.
There were dinosaurids before that, leading up to T-Rex, of course. But when people walk in the hall, what I hear all the time, I'll reenact it a little bit for the YouTube stream, and let the comments rip. Let us ask some questions about dinosaurs or whatever you want, so we can keep the stream going here. But one of the common misconceptions I hear all the time is people walk around this corner, they say, "Ooh, look at the T-Rex."
Oh, I see.
And it's not a T-Rex. And I want to point out, and I'll let you speak to this, James.
Okay, so
How can you tell the difference between, I'll let you just speak about it. How can you tell the difference between Allosaurus and T-Rex?
well, one thing to point out with one of the more common things is it's that there are 3 prominent clawed fingers right here.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of kids know that already, but just so you know too. So you have your 1, 2, 3. And where Tyrannosaurus has essentially these 2, and it's like a little nub on Y-Rex. Mm-hmm. These are the 2 clawed fingers. That's the biggest thing for the average person visiting. Mm-hmm. The next thing I would suggest is looking at the skull, and you can see where the eye would be in this hole here, and the crest right there is something that Allosaurus has. T-Rex doesn't really have the same structure.
And we'll go look at T-Rex here in a moment. The other thing I want to point out is, and what we'll show you on T-Rex is, look how thin and narrow Allosaurus's skull is compared to the T-Rex we'll look at in a minute. It's just a big, giant
It's the knife
boulder of a
blade
head.
compared to the hammer. One other thing I wanted to mention too, and James may have been about to say this too, is also if you look at the feet of Allosaurus here, you'll notice that my hand's shaking again.
all right.
The middle bone just there is kind of the same, almost the same from the top to the bottom, right? It doesn't get much thinner at the top. If you compare that to the foot of something like a T-Rex, the middle one of that is going to be very pinched at the top part as well. So another kind of anatomical difference between Allosaurus and T-Rex as well.
Let's go look at Stan.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to keep it on the Allosaurus skull. Allosaurus means like delicate dinosaur. What is it?
It means different lizard.
Okay, right. So
Not the
look
coolest name.
Look at the skull, how thin it is. And let's go over to Stan. Now that you have Allosaurus' skull on your mind, look how big and thick and wide. Let me go to the other side. Look how wide his skull is compared to Allosaurus. Not that I would want any of these, chomping down on me, but this T-Rex is built like a tank. Allosaurus is very fragile looking compared
By
to
comparison, absolutely.
the skeleton, at least. So if there's any questions about T-Rex, let her rip. If there's any questions about any fossils, any dinosaurs, let her rip. You got 2 of the best
Just gonna mention, too,
paleontologists
as
in the
long
world.
as we're standing here talking about
Yeah,
T-Rex,
go for it,
is
yes.
that part of the reason for that really robust skull is going to be that T-Rex's supreme adaptation is being able to basically chomp or kind of shear through bones. And also, just again, kind of hammer this at home, looking here at the hands, we've got the two fingers here. He doesn't have the nubbin like we do on Y-Rex, but again, if we also, you can see just the two fingers, right? That's the one that most folks know the difference between Tyrannosaurids and the other theropod dinosaurs. But if we also want to look at the foot just down here, note that right at the top of that middle foot bone, it's really pinched in the middle. That's narrowing there is another unique feature in T-Rex or Tyrannosaurs and more generally.
That's really fascinating. That's one of those. See, one of the things I like to tell people, an idea I like to convey is look closer at the fossils, especially adults, who I think we tend to go through life and we get jobs and we go to college and it kind of, the curiosity about dinosaurs is kind of beat out of you because...
It's considered childish,
right,
but it's really
because
not.
what does that have to do with being a CPA or answering an email or data entry or whatever? But I think if you look more closely...
We still do that, though.
That's still a real part of the job for sure. An email started this live stream. Hey guys, you have time for a live stream? But one of the ways to kind of re-spark, in my opinion, the curiosity about dinosaurs, especially in adults, is look closer.
Yeah.
Want to head over to Gorgosaurus and
sure.
talk about what looking closer can kind of reveal to you about dinosaur fossils and making them more real and relatable to modern times?
In fact, these folks here are taking a closer look.
I know.
So you can also see again in the middle of the foot there, the center bone is very pinched and narrowed. He's got the two fingers, classic of the Tyrannosaurids. But if you look much closer, you might notice that his skeleton isn't necessarily symmetrical in some of these places, right? That there are odd differences.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about the chest plate. I'll get there.
Yeah.
I'll get close as soon as you're good. Don't worry about us. We're good. But yeah, look at the chest plate here. It's not symmetrical. What's going on here?
yeah, that big mass or lump right there possibly represents either something like cancer or a massive infection. You got a lot of excess bone growth there, which is a reaction to something going on that's not right.
What did we find in Gorgosaurus's brain case?
In this case, the first known example of dinosaur brain cancer, I believe.
Wow. And they brought that down to we're just a skip away from the oncology center in Houston. So they brought the real skull of Gorgosaurus to the oncology center, did the scan, and that's how we see evidence of brain cancer in Gorgosaurus. As I mentioned in a previous podcast, the way that makes it relatable in a sad way is our pets get disease. Our pets get injured. We have to deal with that in
Very
modern
lucky
times.
we've got vets. Yeah, these animals didn't have anybody to care for them.
Yeah.
So historically speaking, Colin and I used to be tour guides primarily. And so once I was doing a tour with a mother and a child in a wheelchair, and we were going over different things, and I was explaining this story, and the child was looking and the mom was whispering in her ear, and they were talking back and forth. I couldn't really hear them, and the child started smiling, and I was like kind of paranoid, like, what's going on? And so they go, she just had a tumor removed. And so to know what a dinosaur had 1, 2 was really special to her. And that's something that I never would have thought of been a thing on a tour. So that kind of engagement was like, and she got really happy about like knowing that. Again, something different, but it's something I didn't expect.
So we talk a lot about deep time, and it's hard to conceptualize.
It's hard to relate to in any way.
Right.
Yeah, it's such a huge gulf in distance in terms of time that it does feel kind of alien and other. And these animals don't necessarily look that similar to things that are living today. The environment looked very different as well, but it is fun to find the stuff that is relatable in there.
Yeah, try things. So for deep time, for example, Colin mentioned a brilliant story of how Stegosaurus was extinct. Oh, so it's more time between us and T-Rex and Stegosaurus and us and T-Rex. In your mind, imagine that Stegosaurus lived and died and got fossilized, and then like behind you, the Deinonychus and Necrohithosaurus were like living on the earth for a while, and they died and got fossilized like 110 million years ago. And then the Gorgosaurus 75 years ago lived and died and got fossilized before T-Rex.
Right.
And it's like one of those things where I know you walk to the hall, it's like, oh, this and this, but like there's these giant gaps between each step. Right. And so that the antidote is really great because it's like something kind of puts in your mind because this is our everyday. But for the public, it's like, yeah, the Stegosaurus lived with T-Rex, right? And it's like, no, they did not. So anyway,
Land Before Time lied to us.
Oh, so much, yeah.
So the last thing I want to point out on Gorgosaurus is the leg injury.
Oh, of course, yeah. So this is, let me make sure I'm holding the right end of the laser pointer so don't blind myself. That is going to be its tibia right here, and then that's going to be its fibia, which should go all the way down to its ankle there, right? Instead, it's sticking out at this really strange angle. That is a really bad break that is healed exceptionally poorly. That is, I'm pretty sure a compound fracture.
I'm trying to get a picture.
Yeah, if you compare it to the other tibia
one.
fibia, you'll see the fibia comes all the way down to where it meets the ankle.
Right. Versus the other leg. This Gorgosaurus led a very hard life, and these injuries, especially that leg injury, I've heard y'all say that it very likely could have led to its demise.
Eventual death, perhaps. Yeah, it certainly would have been a very debilitating injury if you think about these hunters or these animals having to hunt in order to feed themselves. Any sort of injuries to the lower legs there are going to be pretty devastating. I'm always, I spend a lot of time thinking and imagining, even though I won't ever really know what could have possibly caused an injury like that.
Right.
Could it have been an accident where you're slipping from a cliffside, or is that from actual hunting activities? It's certainly fun to think about, even if we won't know.
Yeah, remember, let your comments rip. Let your questions rip. We want to answer your questions here. Colin, on that note, I was talking to Ryan. Ryan's all over the YouTube channel as well. And a kind of interesting idea that he brought up is it would make sense if Gorgosaurus had brain cancer and was disoriented and suffering through that might have led to the fall.
That could have caused the leg injury.
And once you're immobile.
Very neat theory. I hadn't heard that from Ryan before, but I could absolutely believe that.
Oh, you didn't hear from him? Oh, it's my theory.
Oh, okay.
I'm just joking. Who's Ryan? Do y'all want to talk about trace fossils a little bit? Maybe the mud back here?
Yeah, that's always a good example.
Sure. And then we'll move on to, do y'all guys still have time? How are you looking on?
Yeah, I don't have to go anywhere just yet. Oh, we should probably stop off and see that T-Rex too, since we were talking about the cast in the lab. We can get to that next.
Here is Y-Rex. We have many of Y-Rex's while we're walking by Y-Rex.
It's hard to not stop and see Y-Rex.
We have many of Y-Rex's real fossils on display. And one of the ways you can tell beyond licking it, everyone always says lick it.
Don't lick
it. Don't lick our fossils, please. One of the ways you can see that it's a real fossil versus a replica on display is that it's cradled. It's kind of a jewelry mount. There's a term for it.
No, jewelry mount is the term for it.
I call it jewelry mount. Yeah. So versus the replica back here, let me get out of the way real quick. You can see that it's not cradled.
Yeah, the metal's running through the metals.
Right,
That's
you have the
definitely a
scaffolding
cast.
running through the cast.
If it had been mounted 100 years ago, maybe we would have drilled into the bones to do it. But thankfully, that's kind of fallen completely out of fashion.
Good. You mentioned earlier, as we walk over to the fossilized mud over here, that when you prepare a fossil, you would rather err on the side of under-preparing
than over-preparing, right? You don't want to remove too much. You don't want to damage the fossil. So if you can't remove matrix or rock away from it safely, you just tend to kind of leave it.
Right.
Was there a follow-up question? I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted there.
No. Let's talk about trace fossils. While we wait for more questions, I'm worried that the comments might not be working. We had a few at the beginning, and then I don't know, maybe it's being too strict on the moderation. I have no idea. But ask us questions. We're here in the Paleo Hall with two of our best paleontologists. I don't mean to snicker at that, but no. We have some world-class paleontologists here to answer your questions. So ask your questions. We'll be happy to answer. But to keep the stream going, what are we looking at right here?
Well, actually, I'll pass you to James for that one.
Sure.
A fossil.
Stream's
I'm
over.
not wrong.
No.
Yeah, just stream over. Drop the mic.
Yeah, just drop
breaks it. Basically, it's a trackway, and so we have for non-people who are paleo, we have a map on the side. But for example, you have like your 3 tracks. There's 3 here. Oh, I'll do it this way. There's 3 here, so you can see those. I'm not touching it though. I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
So, and then the one that's really people often miss is this big one. That's a big 3-toe track here, and then what's going on is that's kind of confusing. Where is it? There's a claw. 3rd track there. Apparently, animal walk through, and then water kind of sloshed over it. So dinosaurs, or predatory dinosaurs in particular, they walk on their toes like supermodels, and they usually have one foot in front of the other. So you're seeing this kind of close walk here. This one's a duckbill hadrosaurus. So you can see the giant toe there, another one up there. And this line right here is where I always tell kids, like, your parents say don't go in the mud, and you go in the mud. That's the duckbill going in the mud, basically.
That's the mud like expanding
Under the weight in the water.
weight of the dinosaurs.
Yes. So
what's really cool,
go ahead.
trace fossils tell a story. Talk about that.
Well, in this case, they're kind of just walking at random times. We do have sites like with Africantosaurus. There's the earliest site found in Glen Rose that there's this herbivore is walking, and the predator essentially was like tiptoeing behind it, then starts running. The long neck turns right. This predator turns right too, and apparently it like jumped because the tracks disappear and they smear in the mud. And so before that time, early paleontologists thought they were just big Komodo dragons, just kind of biting after everything. And here it was an actual hunt kind of going on. So that was a big deal, but seeing the animal alive. Another example in Australia, there was a Paleo River, and a lot of like the raptor kind of dinosaurs and some other ornithopod little plant eaters. And some predator was walking on the side. You can see where like stops and then takes off running towards them. And the tracks all show the animals run towards it, which sounds weird, but think about when you run into a bunch of pigeons, they all kind of fly everywhere. So they were just kind of panicking because the river's to their back. They run towards the predator, it confuses it. And so we don't know what happened after that because it got all messed up. But there's a trace fossil of the ammonite poop. Did you show that?
Let's go talk about that. Because the trace fossils, you got me all fired up, James. You get a lot of people fired up.
About trace fossils?
In a good way. Because
very
trace fossils, look, this Acrocanthosaurus,
yes,
super duper interesting, super duper intimidating, super duper impressive to look at.
Yes.
But what would tell an Acrocanthosaurus' story better would be to see its footsteps or see imprint of its, snout in the mud or something like that. Because that displays how the animal lived. Yeah, we'll watch out. We won't bowl anybody over.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch it.
We're making our way to some poop, everybody. Some coprolite. You go to a museum, you see some poop on display. Now,
okay,
what are we looking at?
So here we have a Jurassic coelacanth, very important fish. One of their dinosaur features is this little extra fin piece here. But what's trace fossil focus is this thing right here. So back, I can't remember how many years ago. Can you see it kind of, maybe at an angle?
Yeah,
there it is.
Yep.
And so the museum went on a dig in Germany to the site, and the curator brought me one of these, a sample like to teach with. He goes, "Hey, James, what is this?" And I said, "Oh, I know what this is. It's worm activity. We call that bioturbation, when worms are churning up mud and stuff." And David said, "Nope," which means my entire formal education didn't matter. That's the only thing I knew to call that. And he said, "No, it's actually ammonite poop." Something at the time I didn't think was a thing. I never thought about before in my entire career.
Right.
And he said, and my example to you is if you squeeze toothpaste, it kind of just falls out onto the ground. That's what's happening here. The animals pooped and it kind of fell down and collected right there, which shows the environment's very low energy, because if it were higher energy, like currents, it would have been smeared or something like that, but it fell straight down. So it's the underappreciated trace fossil, an ammonite poop.
And that tells a story not only about the ammonite that took a dump millions of
Relieved
years ago,
himself.
Scientifically speaking, relieved himself. But like you mentioned, low energy environment, people wonder, how do you have fossils so well preserved, especially after millions of years or whatever the case is? How is it so well preserved? Well, the trace fossils indicate that when this fish died, it was so still, the water was so still, probably anoxic, no oxygen, free oxygen in the water. So this fish died and then laid there undisturbed, especially if it was anoxic, especially if it was low oxygen, meaning scavengers didn't come along to try to pick it apart, or maybe not many. It rested in peace. It rested in one piece for millions of years. That's why we have such high fidelity. Look at that. Somebody took hundreds of hours to bring out the detail.
Yeah, I've done some fossil fish preparation, not on coelacanths, but I can say with some experience that the very ends of those rays of the fin can be incredibly delicate, and if you're not careful, it's very easy to destroy them. So oftentimes, if you want to leave the hardest for last, you leave the fins, you prep everything else first.
Right. Here's another thing to talk about. If y'all can, I've heard a theory about our ichthyosaur here. Jurassic mom ichthyosaur with babies in the birth canal You can see, where's the beak? All right, so look at mommy's beak, and then you can see in her stomach, baby's beak. Baby's hit the whole head, and then down through the birth canal, sadly, another beak in the birth canal, all crushed up because this mommy ichthyosaur died while giving birth. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the specific site where this was found, they've got quite a few ichthyosaur fossils, and a very high percentage of them end up being pregnant. And it turns out that those pregnant ichthyosaurs that likely died while giving birth were also usually not very old either. So it seems as though it was kind of this was likely an area in which they were going to give birth in a safe place, most likely, but it wasn't always a safe endeavor. If these animals weren't developed enough, it was certainly very risky. So it's a sort of a tragic story, so to speak, but at the same time, it tells us a lot about these fossils. In this case, it very explicitly tells us that they were giving live birth, which is something that we see in modern marine mammals, but we don't see very often in a lot of reptile groups. So it seems as though this is sort of an independent invention of live birth, so to speak, or convergent evolution is what we generally call it.
Are y'all good on time? We can go another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
6 to 7 hours would be great. That'd be great.
We're going to go another 10 minutes.
Those puzzles will prep themselves.
We'll go another 10 minutes unless some questions really start flooding in, but take it away, James. I'm sorry.
What's the question?
There's no question about ichthyosaurs.
Let's see if there's anything more to add.
Oh, like I said, I always point out that the blowhole will be right here on a dolphin. This one has nostrils. And so when I first saw this, I could find a few of the babies, but I remember our curator, Dr. Backer, was like, look harder. And I'm like, you look harder. And so I always point out the orbit and the mouth there, but the backbones are like Cheerios. So you kind of count them along there. That's one of my cheats. The one thing to point out too is the shale, the rock within shale. It's a deep ocean environment. Mm-hmm. So this animal died and sank to the bottom of the ocean, and that ocean floor over 160 million years became a mountain range in Germany, where the fossil was found by accident.
Right.
And so to me, that as a geology person too, it's like that's really cool that.
Yeah.
You think about if you dropped me on a ship like in Titanic, up to the heart of the ocean, mm-hmm. I just kind of fell down there. This thing fell just like that,
right,
and was lost forever.
And was found on the top of a mountain, more or less.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, it died at the bottom of the ocean, and then was on top of the mountain.
Yes.
Because plate tectonics and how they crush up, and the Rockies and the Appalachians.
Exactly. And here's like a humerus, the upper arm bone. Essentially, what we would consider a humerus, a ulnar radius, and potentially a hand. So basically, it's the same parts we have.
Very cool. That's so cool. Well, I'll keep things moving on just for a few more minutes. And again, this is an AMA. We are live on YouTube, so ask.
I'm old. What does AMA means?
Ask me anything. Ask me anything about. I mean, you
all know. Like, oh.
You can technically ask anything about anything, but we're in the paleontology hall, so
It makes sense to ask about.
if you can keep it to
Tell me about
fossils.
pharaohs.
Here's something interesting.
Ryan section.
These are not dinosaurs. Correct? Why are they not dinosaurs?
They weren't registered properly. No, the way that works is that with modern animals, we have like DNA and all that. Paleontology is just morphology, how it's shaped. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, dinosaurs in general, their legs go straight down. These guys, like arms and legs, are going out to the side like this. Also, in case of Postosuchus, if you look at the hip, that's a socket right there. Compared to Allosaurus or T-Rex, it's a hole in dinosaurs. So it's like those little anatomy things that early paleontologists were like, well, how do you tell this from this other than different rock layers? It's those parts of the skeleton. If you look at most predatory dinosaurs' feet, they have 3 toes going forward and a small dewclaw on the back. This one has 4.
Yeah.
And again, it's a whole litany of rules. Oh, that's what I think. Okay, cool. And so it's more than just that, but those are like the main kind of easy to point out things. So.
That's really fascinating. And I can't fault. That's one of the things I can't fault people for walking in here and saying, oh, look at this dinosaur. I don't want to be that guy who's just like, actually. But at the same time, you do want to educate people on the distinctions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that, like, we use the term dinosaur to refer to a very specific grouping of reptiles, right? But a lot of folks use the term dinosaur in a colloquial sense just to refer to any prehistoric animal. So while we do our best to try and teach people about what the specific definition of dinosaurs are, I try not to make fun of anybody for not knowing that a mammoth is not a dinosaur. It's just it's a prehistoric creature, but they kind of get lumped together sometimes.
Or like we mentioned earlier, the Allosaurus isn't a Tyrannosaurus. You don't want to get too pedantic and scare people away from.
Well, I'm the opposite. Whenever someone's wrong, I have them wear a white aid. I say shame. No, I'm kidding. No, just.
A dunce cap.
Dunce cap. Go sit in the corner, you know.
We're just kidding, y'all.
Write the word
Yeah.
Diplodocus like 14 times, 100 times, whatever.
There's no dumb questions at a museum.
That is
You come to the museum to ask these questions. So don't be too scared or timid around a museum to ask questions that you might be afraid to ask. I mean, this is what we are here for.
And seriously, for us to answer them, we had to ask them first. So,
Right.
so you know, yeah.
See, exactly. For you to know anything. Can you all speak to, in the last few minutes here, some petrified wood? Do you know anything about that to anybody? Any areas of expertise?
I wouldn't say I have any real expertise. In fact, one of my volunteers was asking me the other day how good I was at identifying petrified wood, and I said, "Oh, I'm great." But what they meant was the specific species of like tree that it was coming from, which I am terrible at. I can tell you usually whether or not it is petrified wood or it's not petrified wood. We find a lot of this in the area here down in, say, like the Brazos River. It's in this area kind of usually Eocene in age. The bright colors are coming from the different minerals that were present as this was fossilizing or mineralizing. So you can get some really spectacular coloration in there. And these are usually really well silicified too, which means that the mineral that's kind of replaced the wood is silica. It's basically the same thing as glass. So it's really hard. It can take a really nice, beautiful polish. So we've actually been working to tumble some of the petrified wood nearby in our lab just to kind of polish it up for neat little specimens. Sometimes it can even bring out details you wouldn't necessarily see. There were several pieces that we didn't realize were petrified palm wood until we had tumbled and polished them up. And petrified palm wood, neatly enough, is Texas's state fossil. It's also Louisiana's state fossil too, but
Interesting.
you know, we used to be a coastline for quite a while there. Still have a lot of
Okay,
coastline.
I think that's what we'll talk about a little bit to end the live stream here, unless someone interrupts with a question, which is what
We're
this
here
whole-
for,
What we're
yeah.
here for. But, and this isn't a podcast that James and I did. It drops on March 1st. But one of the
Look out.
subjects we talked about is why in Houston, Texas, or Shreveport, Louisiana, or whatever, when you go to put a fence post in your backyard, why don't you hit a T-Rex femur in your own
Absolutely.
backyard?
Maybe you, since you're
No. Well, generally speaking, this Gulf Coast area is pretty much post dinosaurs. So you can't find a T-Rex here because why? You find them in Big Bend, West Texas, or particularly Wyoming, Montana, that area. Those rocks are supposed to that age. Here we have Gulf Coast. When you think of Gulf Coast, usually Ice Age stuff and younger. And so it's really the rock layer you're looking at to determine what you find. And so if I wanted to go up Jurassic dinosaurs, I can't do it in Texas. They're just not here. We were a giant salt flat. So I have to go to Colorado or Wyoming kind of thing.
Right, because those areas, Colorado, Wyoming, the Walk Quarry, the Morrison Formation,
My beloved Morrison Formation.
used to be a lot more tropical. Used to be a lot more
Arid.
Well, you know,
compared
right.
to like mountains, yeah.
But dinosaurs lived there. That was a
Yes.
habit. That was an environment that dinosaurs lived in, and other creatures as well. Versus the area around Houston, Texas, and the Gulf Coast isn't that old. They weren't here then. We have other things here. We find mammoths in Texas.
Yeah, I was going to say, in our collection here at the museum, we have both one of the giant ground sloths, the Eremotherium, and one of the giant armadillos called Holmesina that were both found inside of Houston city limits. Now, this was a good while back and was before they did a lot of the work to control erosion along the bayous, which I'm grateful for, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm fine with people's houses staying where they are and the fossils being buried. But it is kind of neat that, you know, while you're not going to find a T-Rex in your backyard here in Houston, if you think of fence posts and dig down far enough, you might just come across a giant ground sloth, which is my favorite prehistoric animal.
But not 18 inches or whatever you do. Unlikely.
Not for most fence posts, yeah. That's going to be a lot of very recent sediment on top.
Now, what is cool when they bring in pebbles and things like that for making concrete or there are fish. Sometimes you find fish fossils in there and shells and ammonites and yeah.
Yeah, again, because we've got it present in a lot of the rivers and gravels in the area too. I've noticed in a ton of concrete around Houston every so often are bits of petrified wood, which is kind of neat as well. And while we may not have, T-Rexes here in Houston, if you go to other parts of Texas, you can find lots of great marine reptile fossils as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have a cast of a Tylosaurus in our hall here. It's nicknamed Sophie, that was found out by Waco.
Let's go end there. Let's
Sure.
talk about Tylosaurus as we walk to Tylosaurus, and maybe someone will ask a question. I'm really worried that
The chat just hasn't been
that the
working this
chat,
whole
like
time.
something didn't work, because we had a flurry of them right at the beginning, and then it's kind of dried up. That could just be because we're explaining things so well that it's all the questions
Pat ourselves in the back instead.
that people had. So we'll do one final little walkthrough of the hall, and we haven't even scratched the
The
surface.
Diplodocus we're passing just there was the first fossil, or first dinosaur, I should say,
Yeah.
that the museum acquired.
Yep. And this Diplodocus is known as a holotype, is that right?
Yeah, it's a historic specimen. It is the first Diplodocus hei ever named. It maybe should be called Gallimiopus hei, but in any case, anybody who thinks they might have that specific species would compare it to Dipsy there to find out. It is the one that defines the species.
Right.
Now, our Tylosaurus over here is the bigger of the two mosasaurs. I mentioned this one is a cast, but it's truly ferocious and truly fearsome. I always love to point out what are called pterygoidal teeth, so those things kind of on the back side of their mouth and their
Yeah.
palate.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are always kind of terrifying to me.
That's down his gullet. That's after he's chomped you up. Once you hit those teeth, you definitely aren't
It
coming
certainly
back.
helps to pull things into that mouth.
And also, not a dinosaur.
Also not a dinosaur, it's a marine reptile. It's probably closest to living relatives are either going to be, it was either snakes or, oh gosh, I'm suddenly forgetting this. Komodo dragons. Yeah, okay, there we go.
Very cool. Okay, well, I'm going to be so bummed if I turn off this stream and it's just like 100 questions we
100
didn't
questions
get
we
to.
didn't answer.
Now, I will forward within reason. If there are a bunch of questions that even come in later after the stream is over, I'll say, hey, Colin or James or Ryan, whoever, David, can you shine some light on these questions? But unless we've got any more questions coming here under the radar, I want to thank Colin and James Washington for joining us here. I want to get in on it real quick too, so you can see.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry for the wobbly camera. I'm so sorry, everybody. I don't like that the stabilization is somehow disabled. I'll get between y'all. Somehow disabled for YouTube lives. But anyways, thank y'all so much for joining us. Just because the live stream is over doesn't mean your questions have to be over. So
Keep asking them, come to the museum.
keep asking. I get so much content ideas from the questions that y'all ask. I get so much content ideas from the trolls asking questions because, well, obviously you think this for some reason, or many people think this for some reason. So let's address some of these questions. I'm not calling you all trolls at all. I'm just saying there is value in any comment. I say that I don't want people to be like, oh, any comment now. No, but thank you so much for joining us. We're here at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Come visit us anytime you want, Tuesdays, 5 to 8 p.m. or free. So if you're strapped for cash, hop on the bus, hop on the Metro Rail, come in and see us in the evening on Tuesdays for totally free. All the dinosaurs this year, the whole Paleo Hall is included with that general admission. So come out and see us. Thank you so much for joining us. Any last words, y'all?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything.
Subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. The podcast is called HMNS Beyond Bones. Thank y'all so much for joining us. And I'm going to vamp here until I figure out how to turn it off. Thank y'all so much.